Jim, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jason. What is the origin of the 10-bell salute? I assume the way we know it now is a WWE thing. I can't see it in the territories, a promoter bringing out all the heels and baby faces to stand shoulder to shoulder in unison, even if it was to honor a fallen wrestler. Also, what would happen in a territory if a current wrestler on the roster passed? Would it be just an announcement, a moment of silence, ring the bell without bringing out the roster? So there it is, Jim, the question about the 10-bell salute and how, how promotions dealt with wrestlers passing away in the past.
Well, the 10-bell salute is not just a wrestling thing, right? Don't they do it in boxing also? I believe I've seen footage. Basically, I've not been at a live boxing event when it's happened. I've been at too many wrestling events when it's happened. But the 10-bell salute is decades and decades and decades old. I don't know how old. It's to honor of, either a current wrestler or even a former wrestler in that territory that might have passed away. Like, for example, if, one of the biggest stars in Florida died, they probably wouldn't announce it in New York. But if a guy who had been I'm sure they probably announced in the Garden when Rocca died, did they not? They would have had to.
They would have had to. It was all over the programs at the Garden, so I would think they would announce it. And he had been the commentator there right before he died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, also, the biggest attraction and well, they didn't have a wrestling event there at the time, but when Bruno passed away, he made the Madison Square Garden marquee as an all-time Garden legend, not just wrestling legend. And the 10-bell salute is the talent never used to come out. That's a modern thing. It used to be that the ring announcer would get in the ring and announce the passing and ask everybody to observe a moment of silence for this 10-bell salute. And they'd do the 10-bell salute, ding, ding, ding. And then everybody would, applaud afterwards or, whatever noise they wanted to make. And then in the modern times, it's come that we're all going to come out together when they've dropped any pretense, because obviously you're right. The heels and baby faces couldn't come out together. The people in the building, even Brian, they don't understand that not only has the business changed, but the way the fans look at it has changed. Even in a situation like that, where there was a death, if the baby faces and heels had come out and stood together, I mean, you would have had a variety of responses, but a lot of them would have been booing, walking out, shitting on the whole thing, laughing. Look, they're all together.
The other thing is about heels. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm trying to remember which story I'm thinking of, but was it Bobby Shane when they announced his death? The fans cheered?
I was about to get there. Besides the fact that the people would have possibly asked for their money back if they'd seen the babyface and the heels standing there together and left. I wasn't there for the Shane announcement. I heard about that, but I was in the Louisville Gardens when they announced that Sam Bass had been killed the night before in the car wreck, or 2 nights before. It was, I believe they were in Memphis on a Sunday. And people know this, Sam Bass at the time had been Jerry Lawler's manager. It was the summer of 1976. I think Lawler had just worked with Harley Race in a Southern title match that night in Memphis. Anyway, Sam Bass, Pepe Lopez, and Frank Hester, who were wrestling as the Dominoes, were driving back to Nashville. And Sam Bass was noted for driving 100 miles an hour. And they got to Dixon, Tennessee, and they came around one of the bend on I-40, and there had been a wreck where I guess I can't remember exactly what caused it, but maybe a drunk driver had run into or somehow collided with a tractor trailer truck, and that truck was turned sideways on the road. And when they came around the bend, they were going fast and plowed right into it. Boom. And they called the Highway Patrol, State Police got there, and they saw wrestling bags and wrestling tights and everything just strewn all over the side of the road. And it's Tennessee in the 70s. They knew the wrestlers. They were coming up that road every week, multiple times, right? So they called Jerry Jarrett in Hendersonville, and he was worried that Lawler might have been, and that Lawler ended up not riding with them. I believe either David Schultz or Phil Hickerson rode to Jackson with them. May have been Hickerson. And he said when he got out of the car, he kissed the ground, and Sam took off again. But anyway, Jarrett thought it was Lawler. Oh, shit, because Lawler drove 100 miles an hour in those days, too. And when they got down there, then they realized it was Sam and the Dominoes. But point being, they announced that at that Tuesday night at the Louisville Gardens, Lawler was in the main event. Sam Bass was supposed to be there with him. I think it was Johnny Randolph at the time, who was a wacky radio DJ. And he got in the ring and announced, ladies and gentlemen, night before last in Dixon, Tennessee, there was a car accident, and Sam Bass has been killed. That place popped. The cheer, my mom got goosebumps. She was like, that's because she knew that people believed it, but that's stiff, right? They cheered. And actually later on, Christine Jarrett said that probably would have been music to Sam Bass's ears, that he would hear that he had made such an impression on those people and did his job that well. But yeah, if you were a heel, I mean, they didn't talk about Hester and Pepe Lopez because they were masked guys, the Dominoes. It came out in the newspaper, but they didn't announce it then because they'd just been there a few weeks. They were underneath guys. People wouldn't have felt strongly one way or the other, but they felt they had to explain Sam Bass. And the response to Sam Bass's death was overwhelmingly positive, which shows how much heat he had at the fucking time. And that was not limited to this one instance in that one city. When a lot of people heard that something bad had happened to the heels, and even, I mean, you know, people, oh, that was 45 years ago. Remember when Gino died in 86?
February 86.
The story went around that maybe Chris Adams had something to do with it because they had just done a deal where Gino had blinded Chris Adams and they were wondering if Adams had gotten even.
Yeah.
And now, you know, so people are thinking, now, this is the way it was.
Those fans in Texas were the same ones that when Kerry got busted in 83 for drugs at the airport, they thought the Freebirds planted the drugs on him.
Yes, the Freebirds planted those drugs on Kerry to get him in trouble because that no good Michael Hayes, and it didn't help that one of the fucking Star Wars shows, I don't know if it was a Christmas night at Reunion Arena, but it was at Reunion Arena, and it was during the Freebirds and the Von Erichs deal. And the Freebirds have jumped into the ring in street clothes, or at least Buddy Roberts was still in street clothes, and they were kicking the shit out of the Von Erichs, getting heat on them. And Buddy sits down in the middle of the ring and pulls his cowboy boot off so he could fucking whack the Von Erichs over the head with the boot. And an ounce of weed fell out of his boot right in the middle of the ring in front of 20,000 people. And he just grabbed it and shoved it in his fucking pocket and kept hitting him with the cowboy boot. So the Freebirds planted those drugs on the Von Erichs. Everybody knows the boys wouldn't do that's the way that the fans viewed the situation back then. And now people think I'm fucking lying and bullshitting when I tell this, and I'm just reporting the fucking facts. Yes, when heels got killed, fans cheered because they deserved it in their minds.
You know, when we just talked about Brody Lee on the Omnibus, we talked about the idea we can't remember the last time something like this happened. Minus accident, car accident.
Oh, God.
Crash, minus drug addiction. When was the last time something like this happened? And a lot of people said Eddie Guerrero, but again, Eddie wasn't always the healthiest.
I saw that. And boy, people's cognitive ability, sometimes what we said was, can you remember any time that this happened past an accident or substance abuse or some sudden occurrence? We were talking about an illness that someone got while they were still on top as an active professional wrestler, got an illness and it was kept from the public and nobody knew they were sick until they died shortly afterwards. That was how we quantified that, right? And that still, no, Eddie Guerrero, yes, had a heart attack in his hotel room. It wasn't directly linked. He had sobered up and was on the wagon, but obviously, you know, you don't have a heart attack at 30 something unless you've done something to weaken that muscle, but still that's a sudden occurrence rather than an illness that nobody knew was taking place. Is where we're trying to go with all that.
I thought of one the other day.
Okay.
And it's one of the more mysterious ones because no one knows exactly. There are different stories and different rumors about when this guy died, but I actually think it happened within 2 months of his last territory appearance. Pac Song Nam.
That's right.
Because he was wrestling in Texas in, I think, September of 80, and I think he died just a couple months later. And, it was a little bit off the radar because it wasn't like a big announcement across the world. And people still don't know exactly when he died, but I think it was in 1980. And he had just been wrestling, and he'd been a pretty big star just a few years before that.
The Korean assassin.
Yeah.
And he looked, how can I say this without offending the family if they're listening? If the family of Pac Song Nam is listening after all these years, but he looked bad when he was wrestling. He looked in strange health. And I mean, yes, he had, if for the folks who don't know who we're talking about, there was a giant Korean fellow named Pac Song that had a pituitary gland issue like Andre, like a Big Show had and got corrected early in his life. Like he had like the angels of wrestling in the 40s. He had the giant face, the giant hands and feet. He was big like Baba, the giant. He looked somewhat like Baba, except his body was even thinner and his extremities were even larger in relation. And you didn't see many, 6'5" or 6 or 7 Koreans back in those days. But even though physically he wasn't a bodybuilder, he had just a freaky, weird look, and he looked like he was dangerous and drew some money for quite a period of time. And then suddenly, boom, disappeared, like you said. And nobody ever really found out exactly what, but was it some kind of, I heard maybe some kind of leukemia or cancer or bone disease or something at one point?
I'm not exactly sure. And that's where I say there's some confusion. No one's exactly sure. I heard that it was also a direct relation of what he had, which wasn't acromegaly, but it was something along those lines. No one's exactly sure. But again, he was a part of the Dusty Rhodes babyface turn.
Yeah.
A big deal. Wrestling in 1980 in Dallas for the Dallas office, which was still a major office, even though a smaller territory. All of a sudden he's off the cards. All of a sudden he's passed away.
And Gary Hart got a ton of mileage out of him because Gary Hart loved the foreigners and loved the mysterious Far East and loved the gimmicks that he could flesh out in his mind and drop little things in the interviews and everything. And he's the one that gave Pac, because it was just Pac Song in most territories. But when he was with Gary, it was Pac Song Nam, which just kind of made him sound even weirder, which after the way he looked, you didn't need much help. But yeah, and remember honestly, that was an example of you could feed people shit. He did the Baba chops to the head. And as I recall, they didn't look the most convincing in the world.
Either did Baba's.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. But Pac Song's, but because of they had that head that was 2 feet high and those giant hands on those long, skinny arms, it worked, and people sold it.